The guitar is already in his hands before anyone asks for it. Backstage, the room is quiet in a way that doesn't feel empty. It feels used. The kind of quiet that settles after decades of noise. Cables coiled in corners. Buddy Guy sits slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees, the guitar angled across his lap like it belongs there more than anything else in the room. His fingers move without urgency. Not slow exactly, just measured. Each note lands clean, but softer than it used to, like it's been filtered through time. There's a stiffness when he shifts his shoulders. A pause before he stands. He doesn't rush anything now, not even small movements. His breathing is steady, but you can see the effort in it if you're paying attention. The kind of effort that doesn't ask for sympathy, just space. Someone off camera says it's almost time. Buddy Guy nods once, barely lifting his head. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he lets his fingers run one more line across the strings. Something old, something he's played so many times it doesn't need thinking anymore. Then, quietly, almost to himself, Buddy Guy says, "I don't know how many more of these I got in me." It's not dramatic. It doesn't hang in the air like a performance. It lands the way truth does when it's already been accepted. Because the reality behind that moment isn't just about age. It's about distance, between who Buddy Guy was, who the world remembers, and who he has become when the lights aren't on him. And if you want to understand how he got here, sitting in that chair, weighing whether to walk back out again, you have to start far from stages, far from crowds, in a place where none of this looked possible. Buddy Guy was born into a world where music wasn't a career. It was a release. Rural Louisiana didn't offer much in the way of options. The land was demanding, the work was constant, and comfort was limited to what you could make for yourself. There were no guitars waiting for him. No lessons. No plan. The first instrument Buddy Guy ever had wasn't built to last. It was something pieced together, improvised, more idea than object. A couple of wires, a piece of wood, enough to chase a sound he didn't fully understand yet. Buddy Guy didn't grow up imagining fame. He grew up trying to create something out of nothing. His family didn't have the luxury of supporting a dream that didn't feed anyone. Survival came first. Music was secondary, if it showed up at all. But Buddy Guy kept finding it. He listened more than he played at first, absorbing whatever sounds made their way through his environment. Blues wasn't something distant or romantic. It was present. It lived in voices, in stories, in the way people carried themselves after long days. By the time Buddy Guy started playing for real, there was already something different about how he approached it. He wasn't trying to imitate perfectly. He was reaching for something more physical, something that felt like it came from inside the body, not just the hands. Still, talent didn't change his situation overnight. There were long stretches where nothing happened. No recognition. No clear path forward. Just the same cycle. Work, exhaustion, small moments with a guitar, then back again. Eventually, Buddy Guy made a decision that shifted everything, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. He left Louisiana and went north. Chicago wasn't waiting for him. It wasn't welcoming. It was crowded, competitive, and already full of musicians who had been doing this longer, louder, and in front of bigger audiences. Buddy Guy wasn't special there. Not yet. He took whatever work he could find. Played wherever he was allowed. Sometimes the gigs were small. Sometimes they barely paid. Sometimes they didn't pay at all. There were nights when Buddy Guy played to rooms that didn't care. Conversations louder than his amplifier. People walking in and out without noticing him. And there were other nights, rare at first, when something shifted. A note would land differently. A solo would stretch longer than expected. Someone in the room would stop talking, turn their head, and listen. Buddy Guy wasn't polished. He wasn't controlled in the way some players were. But that was part of it. There was unpredictability in his playing. A willingness to push past what felt safe. Still, recognition came slowly. He wasn't immediately embraced by the industry. In fact, for a long time, Buddy Guy was overlooked in ways that didn't make sense, even to the people around him. He recorded music that didn't get promoted properly, played shows that didn't lead anywhere bigger, watched others move ahead while he stayed in the same position. There's a kind of frustration that builds in those years. Not explosive, not visible, Just steady. Buddy Guy carried it quietly. He kept playing, kept showing up, kept pushing his sound further, even when no one seemed ready for it. Eventually, that persistence started to break through. Other musicians noticed first. People who understood what he was doing, even if the broader audience didn't. Buddy Guy became a player's player. The kind of musician other guitarists talked about when they weren't trying to impress anyone. That reputation mattered, even if it didn't immediately translate into fame. Over time, the gap between what Buddy Guy was doing and what the industry wanted began to close. Slowly, the sound he had been pushing all along started to fit into something people could recognize, something they could sell. Opportunities grew. Not all at once, but enough to change his trajectory. Buddy Guy started recording more consistently, touring more widely, playing for audiences that came specifically to hear him, not just whoever happened to be on stage. The rooms got bigger, the expectations got higher, and the pressure, subtle at first, started to build. Success didn't erase the years that came before it. It sat on top of them. Buddy Guy knew what it felt like to be ignored. That memory didn't disappear when people started paying attention. If anything, it made him push harder. On stage, Buddy Guy became something different. More intense. More physical. Moving through performances in ways that felt unpredictable, almost restless. He wasn't just playing songs. He was chasing something inside them. Audiences responded to that energy. They didn't always understand it, but they felt it. That's what carried him forward. By the time Buddy Guy reached the height of his recognition, he wasn't just another blues guitarist. He was a force within that space, someone who had shaped the sound as much as he had been shaped by it. There were awards, honors, public acknowledgement that had been missing for so long. But even at that peak, there were contradictions. Because the same industry that celebrated him now had spent years holding him back. And the same intensity that made him stand out also took something from him every time he stepped on stage. Buddy Guy didn't talk about that openly. Not then. From the outside, it looked like a late but deserved rise. A long overdue recognition of talent. And that's true, partly. But what people didn't see was the accumulation. The wear that comes from pushing through years of uncertainty, then carrying that momentum into a career that demanded more and more from him. At his peak, Buddy Guy was everywhere he needed to be. Touring, recording, performing at a level that few could match. The guitar felt like an extension of him. The stage, a place where everything made sense. But nothing stays at its peak forever. And even in those moments of success, there were signs, small, easy to miss, that this kind of pace, this kind of intensity couldn't last indefinitely. Buddy Guy kept going anyway, because stopping wasn't something he knew how to do. Not yet. Success didn't arrive cleanly for Buddy Guy. It came layered over everything that had already taken place. Years of being overlooked, years of playing harder than anyone asked him to, years of proving something that no one had clearly defined. So when recognition finally settled in, it didn't feel stable. It felt conditional. There were moments when the industry seemed to lean into Buddy Guy, positioning him as essential, as foundational. Then there were stretches where that attention drifted somewhere else, chasing newer sounds, different faces, easier narratives. Buddy Guy didn't disappear, but he wasn't always centered either. That inconsistency shaped how his career unfolded. There were records that should have landed harder, but didn't. Albums that carried his sound forward, but were either underpromoted or misunderstood. Decisions made around him, by labels, by executives. Choices that steered his work into spaces that didn't fully match who he was as a player. At times, Buddy Guy was pushed to smooth out what made him unpredictable, to make his sound more digestible, more contained. It didn't sit right. You can hear it in certain recordings. Moments where the restraint feels imposed rather than chosen. Notes held back. Edges softened. For a musician built on instinct, that kind of pressure creates tension. And tension, over time, wears down momentum. There were periods where Buddy Guy's presence in the broader conversation faded. Not gone, but quieter. Overshadowed by shifts in popular music, by the rise of other genres that moved faster, hit harder, and demanded less patience from audiences. Blues as a form was never designed for speed. It requires attention. It asks people to sit with something uncomfortable, That didn't always fit the direction things were going. Buddy Guy kept working anyway. Touring didn't stop. Smaller venues again. Then larger ones. Then smaller again. A cycle that didn't follow a straight line. Financially, things improved, but not in the exaggerated way people assume when they see awards and recognition attached to a name. Buddy Guy built a life that reflected success, but it wasn't excess-driven. It wasn't built on spectacle. He invested in stability where he could. A home that felt permanent. A place where he could step away from the road, even if only briefly. Later, that extended into something more public. A club in Chicago that carried his name. Not just a business decision, but a statement. A way of holding onto the space that had shaped him, even as it changed around him. Owning that kind of place isn't passive. Comes with responsibility, maintenance, management, decisions that have nothing to do with music but still affect how it's experienced. Buddy Guy wasn't removed from that. He stayed connected to it in a way that blurred the line between artist and caretaker. And while that added another layer of stability, it also added weight. Because success isn't just about reaching a point, it's about maintaining it. And maintenance is where pressure accumulates. By the time Buddy Guy's career began to shift again, this time toward a more defined resurgence, it wasn't driven by the industry as much as it was driven by recognition from within music itself. A new generation of musicians began pointing back to him. Not as a footnote, but as a foundation. They spoke about his influence directly, credited his style, tried, in their own ways, to capture pieces of what he had been doing long before it was widely acknowledged. That attention reframed Buddy Guy's place in the landscape. He wasn't just active, he was essential. That shift led to opportunities that felt different from the earlier stages of his career. Collaborations that were rooted in respect rather than convenience. Performances that carried a sense of history, not just entertainment. The audience changed too. It expanded, became more diverse in age, in background, in expectation. People weren't just coming to hear songs. They were coming to witness something that had endured. That kind of attention can be validating. It can also be demanding. Because now the expectation isn't just to perform, it's to represent something larger than yourself. Buddy Guy carried that expectation the only way he knew how, by leaning further into the music. On stage, the intensity didn't disappear with age. It adjusted, became more focused, less about movement, more about precision. But the emotional output stayed high. Every performance still required something from him. Not just technically, but physically, mentally. Travel took more out of him than it used to. Recovery took longer. Small injuries lingered in ways they hadn't before. There's a point in a long career where the body starts keeping track. Not in dramatic ways. Not all at once. But gradually. A shoulder that tightens more quickly. Fingers that don't move with the same ease after a long set. Fatigue that settles deeper, lasts longer. Buddy Guy didn't announce those changes. He worked through them. Because that's what he had always done. The difference now was that there were fewer margins for error. The schedule had to be adjusted. Not because he wanted to slow down, but because the alternative wasn't sustainable. Fewer shows in a row. More space between performances. That shift is subtle from the outside. It looks like planning, strategy. From the inside, it feels like compromise. At the same time, the recognition continued to build. Awards accumulated. Honors that acknowledged not just individual work, but an entire lifetime of contribution. The kind of recognition that places someone in a category that's difficult to define. Somewhere between artist and institution. Buddy Guy accepted those moments with the same restraint he had always shown. Gratitude, but not indulgence. Because the reality behind those honors didn't erase what it had taken to reach them. And it didn't change what was happening in the present. There were still nights where the performance demanded more than he felt ready to give. Still moments backstage where the decision to walk out wasn't automatic. Still an awareness, growing, steady, that time was no longer something to ignore. Financially, Buddy Guy reached a place of security that had been absent in his early years. Estimates of his net worth reflected decades of work, touring, recording, business decisions that held up over time. But money didn't simplify everything. It removed certain pressures, replaced them with others. Responsibility for what he had built, for the people connected to it, for the legacy that was now tied directly to his name. Legacy is a complicated thing to carry while you're still living inside it, because it's not fixed. It's still being shaped, even as people talk about it as if it's already complete. Buddy Guy continued to perform, to record, to show up. But the relationship between him and the work had changed. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about being overlooked, or catching up, or pushing through resistance. It was about sustaining something that had already taken its full shape, and deciding how much longer he could, or should, keep holding it at that level. There were conversations happening around him about slowing down, about choosing moments more carefully. He listened. But the decision wasn't external. It couldn't be. Because stepping back from something that has defined your entire life isn't a logistical choice. It's a psychological one. And that kind of shift doesn't happen all at once. It builds. Quietly. In the spaces between performances. In the moments after the crowd is gone. In the physical weight that lingers longer than it used to. By the time the idea of stepping away started to take clearer shape, it wasn't framed as an ending. Not publicly, but internally it carried that weight. Because for Buddy Guy, the stage wasn't just where he worked. It was where everything made sense. And the thought of leaving that space, even gradually, meant confronting something he had avoided for most of his life. What happens when the music stops being the center? He didn't answer that question right away. He kept playing, but the question stayed. There's a different kind of silence that follows a life built on sound. It doesn't arrive all at once. It moves in slowly, almost unnoticed at first. A day without picking up the guitar. Then two. Then a stretch where the instrument stays in its case longer than it used to. Buddy Guy still reaches for it, but not out of habit anymore. More out of intention. The difference matters. Because for most of his life, the guitar wasn't something he scheduled. It was constant. It filled space automatically. It answered questions before he had time to think about them. Now, there are moments where Buddy Guy sits without it. Not restless. Not searching. Just still. Aging doesn't announce itself loudly in his life. It shows up in adjustments. The way he plans a day. The way he measures energy instead of ignoring it. The way rest has become something he considers, not something he avoids. There are physical realities he can't bypass anymore. Hands that have carried decades of tension don't recover the same way. There's stiffness that settles in overnight. A kind of tightness that takes time to work through, even on good days. His back reminds him of long hours spent standing under stage lights. Travel lingers in his body longer than it used to. Flights, hotel beds, unfamiliar routines. None of it is dramatic. It's consistent. And consistency is what changes a life. Buddy Guy has outlived many of the people who once stood beside him. On stage, in studios, in rooms that no longer exist. That absence is quiet, but it's present. Names that used to be part of daily conversation are now memories. Voices that shaped his sound are gone. The world that built him has thinned out. There's a kind of isolation that comes with that, even when you're surrounded by people. Because shared history isn't something you can recreate. Buddy Guy doesn't dwell on it publicly. He doesn't frame it as loss in the way people expect. But it shows in the way he talks about the past. Measured, specific, without exaggeration. He remembers details. Small ones. The feel of certain rooms. The way certain players held their instruments. The energy of nights that didn't seem important at the time, but became significant later. Memory has weight when it's all that remains of certain moments. And carrying that weight, while continuing to move forward, requires a different kind of strength. There's also the reality of relevance. Not in the sense of importance. Buddy Guy's place in music is established, but in the way the world moves around him. New artists, new sounds, new expectations from audiences that consume music differently than they did before. He's aware of it. Not threatened by it, but aware. Because staying connected to something doesn't mean pretending it hasn't changed. There are younger musicians who approach him with respect that borders on distance. They see him as a figure, not just a person. That creates space where conversation used to be. Buddy Guy navigates that carefully. He engages when it feels real. Steps back when it doesn't. Because at this stage, He isn't interested in performing a version of himself that fits someone else's idea of who he should be. That includes the idea of continuing indefinitely. The decision to step away isn't framed as a single moment. It's a gradual recognition. There are fewer dates on the calendar. More time between commitments. Performances that feel chosen rather than required. Each one carries more intention. He pays attention to how his body responds before, during, after. Not with frustration, but with acceptance. There's a limit now. Not a sharp line, but a boundary that becomes clearer with time. Buddy Guy doesn't resist that. He studies it, because understanding where that line is means he can step back on his own terms, not because something forces him to. That distinction matters. At home, the pace is different. Mornings aren't rushed. There's no immediate need to prepare for a stage, a flight, a sound check. He wakes up, takes his time, moves through the day without the constant background pressure of what's next. There are routines, but they're quieter. Time spent sitting outside, listening more than playing, letting the day unfold without trying to control it. Sometimes he picks up the guitar and plays for a few minutes. Sometimes longer. Sometimes not at all. The relationship with music hasn't ended. It's shifted. It's no longer about output. It's about connection. There's something honest in that. Stripped of expectation, the music becomes what it was at the beginning. Personal, unstructured, not tied to an audience. But even in that quieter space, there are moments when the weight of everything he's done settles in. Not pride, exactly. Recognition. An understanding of how much of his life has been spent in motion, in pursuit, in performance. And how unusual it is to finally slow down. That awareness leads to something else. Reflection. Not in a sentimental way. Not looking back to relive anything. More like taking inventory. What mattered? What didn't? What lasted? What didn't? Buddy Guy doesn't romanticize the past. He sees it clearly. The good, the missed opportunities, the decisions that didn't lead where he thought they would. There's no need to rewrite it now. Only to accept it. And in that acceptance, the idea of stepping away becomes less complicated. It's not about losing something. It's about recognizing when something has already been given fully. There's a moment, private, not staged, where Buddy Guy sits with that understanding. The room is quiet again. The same kind of quiet as before a show, but without the anticipation. Just stillness. He looks at the guitar for a while before picking it up. Not to practice. Not to prepare, just to hold it. And then, in a voice that doesn't carry beyond the room, Buddy Guy speaks. Less like a statement, more like a conversation he's finally ready to have. I gave everything I had to this, he says. Every place I went, every night I played. I didn't hold nothing back. He pauses, not searching for words, just letting the ones he's already said settle. I didn't always get it right. Didn't always understand what was happening when it was happening. But I stayed with it. His fingers rest lightly on the strings, not pressing down, just feeling their presence. That guitar, it carried me through things I couldn't explain to nobody. Places I didn't think I'd ever see. People I never thought I'd meet. Another pause. Longer this time. And now, I think it's all right to let it sit sometimes. Not because I don't love it, but because I already gave it everything I had in me. There's no finality in his tone. No attempt to turn it into a closing line. Just acceptance. I'm grateful for it. All of it. Even the parts that didn't make sense at the time. He leans back slightly, the guitar still in his hands. And maybe that's enough now. The words don't echo. They don't need to. They stay where they are. That's what stepping away looks like for Buddy Guy. Not an announcement. Not a final performance framed as an ending. Just a series of small decisions that add up over time. Less travel. Fewer stages. More space between moments. Until one day, the distance becomes the new normal. The world continues around him. Music continues. New voices rise. New sounds take shape. And Buddy Guy watches it. Not from the center anymore, but not completely removed either. Somewhere in between. Present, but no longer carrying the same weight. That shift isn't a loss. It's a transition, one that allows him to exist outside the constant demand of being seen, being heard, being expected. Now, his days are defined by something simpler. Time to sit, to think, to remember without needing to respond. Time to listen to music without analyzing it, without measuring it against anything. Time to be quiet without feeling like something is missing. Occasionally, he still steps onto a stage. Not often, not with the same frequency. But when he does, it's deliberate. There's no attempt to recreate what was, only to be present for what is. The audience feels that. There's a different kind of attention in those rooms now. Less about spectacle, more about witnessing. They're not just watching a performance. They're watching someone who has spent a lifetime inside the music, choosing when and how to step back from it. And that choice carries its own kind of weight. When the performance ends, Buddy Guy doesn't linger the way he used to. He acknowledges the moment, accepts the response. Then he leaves. Not abruptly, not disconnected, just without extending it beyond what feels right. Back in quieter spaces, the rhythm returns to something slower, more sustainable, more aligned with where he is now. There's no need to fill every silence. No need to prove anything. The work has already been done. And in that space, between what was and what remains, Buddy Guy finds something that wasn't available to him before. Rest. Not just physical, but mental. A release from the constant forward motion that defines so much of his life. It doesn't erase anything. It doesn't replace the years of movement, of sound, of pressure. But it balances them, gives them context, and allows him to step into whatever comes next without needing to define it. Because not everything has to be followed by something else. Sometimes, it's enough to recognize where a journey has led, and let it be what it is. So what do you think about Buddy Guy's life? The way it built, stretched, and slowly came to this quieter place? Share your thoughts below. If this story stayed with you, you can show that. And if you want more of these close looks at the lives behind the spotlight, stay with us. There's always more beneath the surface.